for African American children so that they can see themselves in books, but I write so that white children can see African American children in books. And I write because there are a lot of biases and omissions to correct. So I'm trying to set the record straight and really address kids who might not be growing up in households that are as progressive as the one where Jeffrey was raised. So I want them to be exposed to a more complete history, and then to make decisions based on that and act on that. That's how I started out. We had to wear little dresses to school in the 1960s. And that's my first poem that I ever made up. My mother, I dictated it to my mom on the way home from school. She asked me if I'd repeat it, and then she wrote it down because I didn't know how to spell all the words at the time. Months later, I copied her cursive handwriting, and so what you see is my attempt at cursive writing in 1962. My dad was a high school printing teacher, meaning he had printing presses in his classroom at Douglas High School in Baltimore, and used some of my early poems as typesetting exercises for his students. So I got to see my work in print on the equivalent of index cards at a very early age, before there was a dream of becoming an author when I grew up, because I never met a real life author. I loved to read, but I assumed that the people who were writing the books were, number one, dead, and number two, certainly not getting paid to books. So I grew up writing, but with no idea that I would end up in a career that would utilize that gift. On the left is my sixth grade class newspaper, in which I wrote an op-ed piece, one paragraph op-ed piece about homework, which I said homework was necessary, but should not be given on weekends. I think that kind of redeemed me with my friends. I was able to keep my popularity quotient up. And as things kind of came full circle, when Jeffrey was growing up, I actually became an op-ed columnist for a while, and an editorial page editor at a newspaper. My first professional publication credit was for a poem called I'm Made of Jazz, that, much like the poem that I showed you that I made up in first grade, came to me in a piece. Those are the only poems that have ever come to me in a piece and out of the blue, so to speak. And I think the way I look at it now is the first poem was God's way of getting my parents' attention and letting them know they had a child with a gift. And fortunately, I was placed in the right household family to nurture that gift and cultivate that talent. And that poem was God's way of getting my attention, because at the time that it was published, I was about to go into graduate school in full ride to pursue public administration. After the poem came out, I went to one class and dropped out. And put myself through grad school twice. My first book was Juneteenth Jamboree. It came out in 1995. Jeffrey was 6 at the time, and some people who saw the book thought that Kofi, the little boy in the book, was based on Jeffrey. He was not. They also thought that the kitchen, which in the book, which had grape wallpaper, grape motif on the wallpaper, was inspired by my kitchen, which also had grape wallpaper, and I collected little things with grapes. But the illustrator I'd never met and never talked, at least not before the book was published. One of my favorite books, Becoming Billie Holiday, is a book that I think I was born to write. It was my first collaboration with Lloyd Cooper. And on the right is a sign that we saw at Frederick Douglass High School in New Orleans on our book tour for Ken. There is no good writing, only good rewriting, revisions. That was on like a sandwich board in the hallway of the school. So that's a peek at my revision process. What you see on the left is the beginning of All Rise, and it may not have even been called, it was probably just called Ketanji Brown Jackson. I don't get into titles sometimes when I'm at the manuscript stage. Anyway, it was written in prose. And 2 weeks after my editor at Random House had made the offer, I told my agent, I think I want to rewrite that as a poem. And so she said, okay, and I did, and so you see the beginning of the manuscript as a poem, and that's what made its way into between the covers of that book, the poem. So,
what year?
All Rise.
What year is it?
Oh, that's last year. Last year.
It's also the social justice leaders.
Okay.
Nominated.
Yeah. Last year. So these are some of my American Library Association award winners, and I would like you to guess And there's going to be another slide too of those. But yeah, I want you to guess which ones were banned or challenged. Which ones have been banned or challenged? You may want to jot.
Unspeakable.
Just jot.
All, I'd say all.
No, they haven't all been.
No,
Congratulations.
Yeah. Before this latest, latest proliferation of bands came up, I kept wishing that Becoming Billie Holiday would be somebody please just ban the books so okay. Buzz behind. But it came out in 2008, longer before this recent spate of bands. Okay. Before John was a jazz books, along with my book, Gordon Parks, How the Photographer Captured Black and White America. They were both banned in East York, Pennsylvania, but the ban didn't last very long. Within a month, students had protested to repeal the ban. The community got behind them, and the ban was repealed. So, because although it was not banned, in San Antonio, Texas, when it was up for the Texas Bluebonnet Award, some schools in San Antonio decided that they weren't going to let students consider that book. So that's the black box, that's where my book was. They blacked my book off of the ballot. They blocked
Texas is
it.
up.
So, I mean, talk about rigging an election, huh? So a bookstore, an independent bookstore owner in San Antonio, all because of San Antonio.
Yeah.
Jeffrey and I, we talk about awards and rewards, and my son, Jeffrey, Boston Weatherford.
Don't forget the Boston.
Okay.
All right, so this hyper-realistic self-portrait I drew when I was in kindergarten. And when I took it to my mom, she put it into this giant frame. So
Little did I know I was creating a monster. That one frame.
one frame. So as a kid, you can imagine that made me feel like the best. So as a kid, you can imagine that made me feel like the best artist on the planet. And I felt like every piece of art that I do should be framed, go into a museum. Somebody's gonna pay billions of dollars for it. Except as a kid, we really don't have a concept of art supplies costing money or money in general. So I would take my beautiful, hyper-realistic representations to my mom. Like, hey mom, I drew this picture, can you frame it? And she would take it and be like, this is a beautiful picture. Let's put it into the gallery of the refrigerator. So by a show of hands, how many of you have ever been in the gallery of the refrigerator? Okay, so look, that's where all great artists get our start. So you're on your way to becoming a fantastic illustrator already. And that's the same thing that I tell kids. The same way that my mom, she had a seed that was planted and her mom saw that seed. That seed's potential.
Yes.
And the same way that her mom saw potential in her, she saw potential in me. It might have taken a few more doodles, but she did eventually see the potential. So I was always doodling in class. Anytime I had a piece of paper in my hand and a pencil, didn't matter whether it was math, science, English, art class. In art class, I was the worst. I would turn over the images and draw my own pictures. My art teachers were not rocking with me like that. But these are actual notes from my 3rd grade math class. You can see at the top of the page, I had about 4 to 7 lines dedicated to taking notes, and then the entire rest of the page was dedicated to cultivating my artistic ability. And as a director, okay, we're gonna do a skit. All right, so
I'm the mom.
and I'm the son. All right.
And this is the kitchen, and that's the family room.
And this is me playing video
And it's
games.
Sunday night. It's Sunday night, and 60 Minutes has just come on, and so it's tick, 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 tick. Jeffrey, stop playing. Turn the game off.
I can't pause it. I'm about to win, Mom. Hold on.
We've got to focus on the week,
But
the school week ahead.
Just 1 second.
Yeah, wait a minute, Nick. You've been playing video games all weekend. All weekend. Turn it off so we can focus on school. Do you have any projects, any tests coming up, any permission slips in your backpack?
Mind you, I couldn't read my handwriting. Okay, looks
Neither
like
could
I
I.
have a project due on
Okay, I'm
Monday.
glad we booked.
All
But
right.
wait a minute, Monday? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow is Monday?
Yes, you've been playing video games all weekend.
I gotta beat this level.
No, you gotta turn that game off. Now, what is the project?
looks like I have an infographic
Okay.
on Colorado. Okay.
All right, so, wait, so that's due tomorrow. That means that right now, the Hobby Lobby doesn't even open on Sundays. Michael's is closed, so everything's closed. So whatever you have to do for this project, you're gonna have to use supplies we have right here at home. So just turn the game off rather, and it's gonna be a long night for you. And give me the controller, because you're gonna be punished. You're not gonna be
I gotta
punished.
beat this and
No,
save
no,
it
no,
then.
no, 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 no. Lord help me.
Woo!
So, needless to say, my mom was fed up with my forgetfulness at that point, and she scheduled a parent-teacher conference the next week in which she got a plan together in which to stop me doodling in class. Spoiler alert, I did not stop, but I got extracurricular practice and instruction, so I
Not
had,
necessarily so fast, he's compressing the timeline.
compressing, of course.
What I did was I told the teacher that I would come in every Monday afternoon to find out everything that he had to do for the week. And then
Momager.
years later, like in 6th grade, he was still doodling. And I looked at his notebook and said, well, these are pretty good. Let me put him in some art classes outside of school. So that's, yeah.
So I had the opportunity to go to the Greensboro Cultural Center, which was an arts facility that was one city over from me. Hey, I see you.
I live right across the street from that place.
That's amazing,
I
right?
spend a
So,
lot of time over there.
multiple stories of artists, kind of like, I would say artist shops and artist galleries. So they have like pottery and photography and dance studios and painting and gesture, like every floor has different artists doing their thing on it. And so I would go there and learn from all these different artists. So I would do gesture drawings. This is an African parrot. For those of you that don't know what a gesture drawing is, it's like the same style of drawings that they do in court. So you have to draw very fast because your subjects are moving around and, doing the thing. So I drew this in about, I would say 10 to 15 minutes or so. The parrot was moving around and squawking and talking. It's probably still alive. It's an African parrot. They have a pretty long lifespan, so maybe if I go back, it'll still be there. But when I was 17, I had the opportunity to study with a master level artist by the name of Joseph Johnson. He happened to be my assistant principal at the time. So your assistant principal has superpowers. You just might not know about it. I just thought they were just an assistant principal, right? The head of the school. So between my junior and senior year, I went over to Mr. Johnson's house for a few hours every week, and he just reframed the way that I approached a piece of paper. I always tell kids that I was never the best artist in class. That's a traumatizing thing for a young budding artist. It really is. They're like, who was the best artist in class? And I'm like, oh, it was Alex Nolan. It was Spencer Pendry. It was Stephen Hall. It was Teresa Lynn. It was Grant Farrell, because I remember all of these people. Like, I definitely know who was the best artist in class. And all those people that I named, not one of them are doing anything with their artwork today, right? Because I'm a proponent of hard work beats talent, right? Hard work beats talent 100% of the time. If you aren't taking advantage of the gifts that you have, the gifts are going to go to somebody else. That's just the way that
That's
the cookie
right.
crumbles.
Yep.
So I chose to continue working hard, drawing every single day, right? And by the time I got done with Mr. Johnson's master mentorship, I drew another self-portrait when I was 17. And of course, this one, I probably thought this looked just like me when I was a kid.
Yeah, you kind of look like that.
Yeah, I didn't have any, I had a long neck,
I
no
didn't
legs.
have to buy shirts for him.
Right. And I guess by that time, other people considered me the best artist in class, but I really had, I guess, ugly duckling syndrome of artistry, and so I just had this ultra perfectionist type of, I felt like I had to just pour my heart and soul out on every piece of art that I do, and I'm like the worst perfectionist ever when it comes to my art. Like, people like look at this like, wow, that's incredible. I'm like, oh, the nose is a little sideways and the ears droopy and then the eyeballs a little slanted. Like, it's just bad. But because of my perspective, because of how I see my own artwork, that is it's been a gift, you know, like to be that, feel like I have to produce on that level. So I feel like that's why I am where I am today, because I'm never satisfied with my work, much like our friend Eric was talking about. And it's also more of a reverse. I'm not really a fan of the process necessarily. I'm a fan of this, talking to people about what goes on behind the scenes, going to schools and enriching the children and talking to them and showing them that they can actually do something with the creative side of life. Okay? So these are some of the books that I have, well, all three of the books actually that are
Our collaborations.
yeah, there are collaborations. You Can Fly, the Tuskegee Airmen, of course, about the Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American pilots during World War II. This was our second title, Call Me Miss Hamilton, about a very obscure civil rights figure by the name of Mary Hamilton. She is the reason they have to call people of color by honorific names in a court of law. And there was about 4 pictures of this lady total, and it was the worst project for me to illustrate. Like, I was about to quit illustration, to be honest. I was like, no, this is.
And in fact,
horrible.
he did give me his resignation. And I said, so this means you're not gonna go on school business anymore? Oh, no, I won't do that. And I'm like, well, you're just gonna do it on the basis of one book?
Yep.
So he thought about it a while.
Yep, so that book, yeah, it about broke me as an artist. I
Well,
felt,
let's get off of it.
get off of that book, and then Ken.
Oh, wait a minute. See, I'm messed up again.
Okay, here, just hand
You
this.
take
Just
it.
hand this.
Okay, right, okay, so, yeah.
Okay.
Switch up for us. You wanna go to the video?
I was trying.
Okay,
Oh, so that's
okay.
what's going on. Okay, so the style of art that or the medium that I produce artwork in is known as scratchboard. So scratchboard is a subtractive style of art, meaning instead of adding like paint or marker or graphite or ink or whatever, adding to the paper, I am taking away from the paper using these little metal files called nibs. They are like little sharp pointy tools. And I scrape the paper, the surface of the paper, and then reveal likeness underneath. So it's quite literally reverse drawing. Most of the times you're drawing like the outlines of things, but I actually draw with the light. So
So we're not with that.
that's cool. We can just keep it moving.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's
we're
what
gonna keep moving. Okay, so Ken came out in September of last year, and if Becoming Billie Holiday was the book that I was born to write, I don't know what Ken is. Maybe it's definitely the book that I was bred to write. Let's put it that way. I was bred to write that because it's a family history. And it was, I wrote it at the suggestion of my agent. He came to me and said, is there a town, a black town, that you could write about in the same vein that Edgar Lee Masters wrote about the fictional town of Spoon River in Spoon River Anthology? And I said, yeah, my ancestors founded these 2 little villages in Talbot County, Maryland, and I could write about that. And he came to me with the idea because he was trying to think of a project for Jeffrey and me to collaborate on. So I didn't do it right away. It took a few years. And in the years between the agent giving me the idea, the project, the charge to do the project, and my starting it, I began to have some conversations with other African-American creatives in the children's book field about whether we should continue to document slavery, about whether we should, just focus on Black joy. And I love Black joy. I'm all about Black joy. But of the tens of millions of people who were enslaved in the Americas, only 300 had their stories documented. That's an awful lot of lost history, a lot of lost history. So I can't just walk away from that. We must continue to document that because there are too many African Americans who don't know our history, and our history is America's history. America doesn't really know our history.
Yes.
So we must do the hard work and the painful work of documenting enslavement. So these are some of my previous books about enslavement. One, By and By, is not entirely about enslavement, but it's set right here in Albert Tinley. And he said, okay, I'm in. And then I had to come up with the manuscript, and it's written as if it's a sermon. It starts off, my life is a sermon inside a song. I'll sing it for you, won't take long. So anyway, but his father couldn't afford to take care of him, and so he hired him out. So he worked right alongside enslaved people. He was born, like in the 1860s, before emancipation. So I've written about enslavement many times. Moses, large is not in terms of acreage necessarily, but although the Lord owned a lot of acreage as well, but the largest in terms of the number of enslaved people who were owned by a single family. So you'll hear from our ancestors and also from their contemporaries on the plantation, people who were not related to us. Frederick Douglass, who was the most famous person enslaved at White House. Harriet Tubman, who came through Talbot County and led people to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Francis Scott Key, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner and married into the Lloyd family. The Chesapeake Bay itself. The Chesapeake Bay Retriever, which was a breed of dog that was bred at White House. It's the only American-bred retriever. You'll hear from the slave ship and from clocks, from mirrors, and you'll also hear from me. It's a bit meta. So the book not only attempts to document the stories or reclaim the lost narratives of our ancestors, but also the text chronicles our quest to collect that information and discover that information, and we're on the trail and see where the trail goes.
And so this is my depiction of White House. Well, I've done from a reference photo of actual White House. One of the digital scratchboard renderings, and the reason behind me switching from traditional scratchboard to digital scratchboard for this particular project, one is because this project had an immense amount of illustrations to do, and if I had to do traditional scratchboard with it, I'd probably still be working on it. Secondly, I've been doing scratchboard for almost a decade at this point, so my hands, scratchboard is just unforgiving, all the way around, both on the actual creation of it, you can't mess up. If you mess up, you might have to start over. And secondly, on the actual process of creating it, you are basically carving into the paper. So I started to develop carpal tunnel in my hands, and I was really just gonna all right, I'm gonna go down with the ship. Just keep on doing scratchboard. That's what people want. My mom was like, you need a switch. You need a switch. You need a switch. And eventually I was like, all right, I'll switch. So this is a Chesapeake Bay Retriever, again in the digital scratchboard rendering.
That's awesome.
I appreciate you. Francis Scott Key, which, the most recent
Bridge.
we've heard of Francis Scott Key is the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
This is a cutaway of a slave ship.
Wow. Wow.
As the African prisoners of war, we were treated like cargo. So quite literally put above the barrels of whiskey and salted meats and that type of thing. Wasn't like a cruise ship, of course. We were packed in like sardines, and they actually overpacked the ships because they knew that they would lose cargo, meaning they would lose life. So they deliberately overpacked ships so they wouldn't lose money in the passage, but lost a lot of life. So we know that there are many horrible things about slavery, but one of the coolest things that we have discovered is it was family separation, right? That's like a spiritual wound that it's almost impossible to heal, especially back in those days. If one of your family members was sold away, there was a very high probability that you were never ever going to see them again or hear from them again.
Yep.
So,
And as a result, family really took, kin and the word family took on different meaning because people were formed in family groups, but they weren't necessarily blood relatives.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I thought it was important to, and I think it is important to continue to write about enslavement is because when kids hear these stories, they tend to oversimplify it. Of course, enslavement has been romanticized a lot in the media. Kids, after I present Moses or other books about enslavement, they're like, I would have done this, I would have run away, I would have fought, I would have rebelled,
I would have beat up
yeah, right, I would have this and I would have that. No, it's not that simple. First of all, you probably had family, and maybe your family hadn't been separated yet. So if you fled, your family might be persecuted because the masters would want the family to stay where you were. And many times they wouldn't even tell their families because they didn't want them to know if they fled. I mean, you didn't often hear about family groups fleeing together because, if you've ever taken kids on a vacation, you know how hard it is to travel with kids. Harriet Tubman used to give kids paregoric, which is an opiate, to keep them quiet on her treks to freedom. So it just wasn't as simple as kids think it is. You were not only chasing freedom, but you were running away from family in effect. So at White House was one of many farms owned by the Lloyd family. White House was just the flagship of the flagship plantation. And at White House, there were 300 enslaved people living in a community called the Long Green. So that was what the slave quarter was called. But there were 600 some other people, enslaved people living on the Lloyd's other farms in the area. So the Lloyd family owned up to maybe 1,000 slaves. And at Long Green was really a kin community, meaning multiple generations of the same families lived in that community. I was able to, you want to talk about that picture first?
So this is one of the illustrations from Ken, but this is a depiction of the birth of a son in the family. So it was also a juxtaposition to, there's an image of a wet nurse, and a wet nurse is someone who basically takes care of the enslaver's children. So this was a job by enslaved women, and they essentially had to, breastfeed the master's children before their own children got to eat. And that's one of the horrors of slavery, that you have to, even their bodies, like the milk that was for their own babies was reserved for the master's children.
And the poem that accompanies the artwork is about my fourth great grandmother, who was known in the plantation ledger as alternatively as Nan, Nancy, or Nanny. And so what I have speculated that she was the nanny. I know she was a house servant. I don't know that she was the nanny to the children. So Ken spans a period of about 150 years, from 1770 to around 1920. Starts at White House and then goes into the villages of Unionville and Copperville, which were both co-founded by my great-great-grandfathers. So long before we had conceived this project, we were absorbing family history in Talbot County. My family still owns a small farm in Talbot County. It's land that was sold off the rest of my great-grandfather had sold off the rest of the land in the 50s. My parents reclaimed that land, most of that land, in the 1970s. So we still go there. Jeffrey grew up going grandmother's side, but on my my great grandmother's side was the person was Isaac Copper, and he fought in the U.S. colored troops. And he is now recognized as a historical marker. Even before I started working on the book, I had done some research into my family's genealogy documents that I turned up, the military record of Isaac Copper, who I call him Isaac Copper III, who fought in the U.S. colored troops. And then you'll see here that there's an Isaac Copper, there's a John Copper, there's Enos Mooney, several of these people who founded Unionville. There were 17 African-American veterans who founded Unionville, maybe 18, looks like 18. And my great-great-grandfather was one of them.
Wow.
And so the historical marker denotes the founding of the town. The state put that one up, and the community put that one up. So I was fortunate in terms of researching the project in that the Lloyd family kept meticulous records. And they donated those records sometime in the 20th century to what was then known as the Maryland Historical Societies, now known as the Maryland Center of History and Culture. And so I was able to, I mean, they have like a whole, in Easton, they have a whole cabinet of microfiche and microfilm of the Lloyd papers. And so among those papers are the ledgers, the plantation ledgers. In addition to researching the Lloyd family papers, I also researched slave ship databases, military records, as I've shown you, material culture, that's the furnishings and the other things that people owned, the landscape, historic images, and local lore. And there even has been an archaeological dig at White House that was conducted by the University of Maryland. So I read some of those reports about artifacts that were turned up. So that's the slave ship database, slavevoyages.org. That is a database that was put together by the same department at University of Maryland that's doing the archaeological dig, and it lists the database lists the residents of White House. I much prefer looking at their names in the fancy penmanship of the day. So I didn't rely on this record, and I was, even though I used this record and the ledgers themselves, I was aided by a cousin whom I didn't realize had already connected all the dots for me. And so he had all his information on Ancestry.com, and so I was able to like step back and stop trying to connect the dots between the Isaac Copper, who was born in the 18th century, and the one who lived until the 1920s. I could really focus more on trying to put together the story. Those are some interior shots that were probably taken during the Great Depression at White House. And the house still stands. It's about 1.5 miles from our little farm, and it's still under Lloyd family ownership, the 11th generation of Lloyd family ownership. And I did go inside. I didn't go up the steps. I wanted to go upstairs, but they didn't invite me upstairs. So I just walked around downstairs, looked at the etchings and artwork that hung on the walls. I went to the Lloyd family cemetery, which was out back. I held the key in my hand to the front door. And because when I went there, I kept waiting I felt like I should feel something. Shouldn't I feel something powerful, you know? I'm just not feeling it, you know? Despite the fact that I had been there 3 times. And so maybe the 3rd or 4th time I went there, the owner, Ed, whose name is not Edward Lloyd, his name is Richard Tillman, handed me a key. He said, "That's the key to the front door." And I said, "Well, does it still work?" And he said, "Yes, it does. We still use it." And the key must have weighed about 2 pounds. I mean, it's wrought iron. You can see how big it was. And when I held that key, it was like I felt something electric, as if my ancestors had held that same key. Now, what I should tell you is that my ancestors worked not only as house servants at that plantation, but as craftspeople in the artisan shops, and also as farm laborers. So we worked, in every aspect of plantation life. But the fact that we were house servants, the fact that the women in my family were house servants made it possible to know the names of the offspring.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I found in the ledger was that if you were a house servant, let's say I'm a house servant at White House, then Jeffrey would be listed in the ledger as Carole's Jeffrey. But if I hadn't been a house servant, I would just be listed in there as Carole. He'd be listed in there as Jeffrey. Maybe some of the enslaved people at White House had last names, most did not, but some did, quite a few did. But the fact that some of us, my ancestors were house servants, did make it easier to trace the line when I was trying to do the tracing, before I knew that my cousin had already done it for me. That is the burial ground, and that was really the most powerful place for me at the plantation, the burial ground of the enslaved people. The plaque was installed in 1980 by the Lloyd family. It's just a grove of trees. There are no burial markers or anything. But when I reached that point at the plantation, or estate as it's now referred to, it was almost as if the ancestors said, "We have been waiting for you."
Mm.
And I kneeled down and cried. And that was my last trip to, no, it wasn't my last trip because I took Jeffrey back, but we couldn't make it over to the burial ground because there was, the cordon was still up. Couldn't get across the field. And this is my treasure from the whole research process. And I stumbled upon that before I even started working on the book. It's a picture of my great-great-grandfather, Isaac Copper. And I had never seen his face prior to maybe 2015 when the Ruth Star Rose exhibition was touring. Some of you may have seen it. I think it came through Salisbury as well. I'll talk about her a little bit more in a few. But this was a takeaway for me.
Yes.
And I didn't arrive at that until we were on the book tour for Ken. There's a lot of discussion about the wealth gap, the generational wealth gap, the fact that African Americans have not been able to accumulate wealth because have been so oppressed. And then I thought, well, that's true. I said, but we've also been denied our history.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been deprived in that way as well. So knowing your history is generational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
although you can't take it to the bank, nobody can take it away from you either.
Yes.
So I think
Yes.
that, more of us need to go, embark on that journey of collecting family history, even if it's just from mommy and daddy and grandparents, from the people who are still here. Because one day that'll mean something to subsequent generations.
So this is my depiction of the ledger. The Lloyd's writing out the ledger that my mom discovered the names of our ancestors on. In the actual ledger, look on the left and the right of the image. And where is it? On this side, I think?
No, I think it's well, he may be. You're looking for Isaac Copper.
Yeah.
Let me see. I think he's on the other. He's actually on a different page.
I see Nancy
You
up
see
there.
Nancy?
Yeah, on
Okay.
Nancy.
See the Coppers. Right. A lot of the names come up generation after generation.
Very creative
Yeah,
people.
Isaac. Yeah, I think they what they did is they followed the model that was used by the enslavers of naming the eldest son after the father, and so the name Isaac Copper comes up in generation after generation, and they even recycle the names of the offspring. They come up in generation after generation.
So Frederick Douglass, he was also enslaved on White House's plantation, and he actually wrote about our ancestor Isaac Copper in his biography, and that was my mom's first touch point to this ancestral figure. Let's see.
And that's what he wrote. Once in a while, even in a slave state, a Negro had a surname fastened to him by common consent. This was the case with Uncle Isaac Copper. When the uncle was dropped, he was called Dr. Copper. He was both our doctor of medicine and our doctor of ministry.
Mm.
So that's the Isaac the Elder, I call him. And what he did on the plantation, by the time Frederick Douglass arrived, he needed a cane to walk. He was an old man. He was past labor, as it was noted on the ledger. So what he did was he taught the young people the Lord's Prayer. And if they didn't get it right, what did he do? He hit him right. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go, I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to know anymore. It took me about 5 or 6 years to come to the understanding that back then, everybody was doing that to children. Everybody was hitting children back in the 1700s. So I really had to warm up to him. So the earliest record of our ancestry is for Isaac and Nan Copper, and it appears in an inventory of one of the Edward Lloyd's estates. Edward Lloyd had died. One of the Edward Lloyds had died, and the inventory was taken in 1770. And here you see Nan and Isaac. And what breaks my heart, yeah, they were both 7 years old at the time and already enslaved. And probably already working, because enslaved children were put to work, between the ages of like 5 and 7.
Yeah.
So that's Jeffrey's depiction of Isaac and Nan. So this is for Candy. All right, so Saidiya Hartman is a MacArthur Genius Fellow. And she has a book called Wayward Lives. It's about African American women in Philadelphia during the early part of the Jim Crow era, the early 20th century. And how they made a way for themselves and what they had to do to make it. And some of the things that they had to do were not pretty. And what Saidiya Hartman did was she researched, she's a sociologist, and she researched police records, public welfare records, and the like to reconstruct these women's lives. But as many researchers of African American history do, she reached a brick wall. For most genealogical researchers, many African American genealogical researchers, that brick wall is 1870. So what Saidiya Hartman did was she coined a term called critical fabulation. And what it means is you take the existing facts and you speculate after that to reclaim the lost narratives, particularly narratives lost due to enslavement. And so that's what Saidiya Hartman does, and I think I've been doing that for some time. I just didn't have a term for it. I thought it was just called lying. So anyway, we took the facts and we used our imagination to not only reconstruct lost narratives, but in the case of Jeffrey, to reconstruct the faces and the vistas that our ancestors may have seen. So we're going to read a few poems now. You want to start out? You want the book? Oh, thank you. And so when Jeffrey reads this, I want you to see how I have interwoven the historical events of that time period with my speculation about Isaac the Elder.
Young Isaac, before the Boston Tea Party protested taxation without representation, I was training to serve exotic teas in porcelain cups and saucers. Before the First Continental Congress convened and Patrick Henry proclaimed, "Give me liberty or give me death," my childhood had come to an end. Before Paul Revere warned of British invasion and Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, my freedom was already hostage. Before Crispus Attucks, a free black man, fell at the Boston Massacre, becoming the first fatality of the American Revolution, I had resisted the urge to rebel, to run. Before General George Washington crossed the Delaware River, I sat on the banks of the Wye, wondering how far to Africa. Before the Patriots defeated the Redcoats to free the new republic from the crown, my royal ties were robbed from me, but Africa drummed in my heart.
Wow.
And this is actually one of my favorites. Prissy. Prissy would have been one of my great aunts. She was a child of Isaac and Nan, daughter of Isaac and Nan. And some, but not all of their children worked as house servants. Prissy, house servant, born 1788, daughter of Isaac and Nanny Copper. Since I was old enough to reach a table, I have worked in the great house with my folks. Early on, I could set a table and curtsy. In silk dresses that Colonel Lloyd's daughters tired of and cast aside as out of fashion, I admire my reflection in a gilded looking glass. I am more well-versed in etiquette than some of the guests that I serve. One dinner guest remarks that my name comes from the Bible, the New Testament. Says he'd like to stay with me like Paul did with Priscilla in Corinth. Prissy is not short for Priscilla, I want to say. Prissy is my whole name. As I serve dessert, the man licks his lips, says he'd like a taste of me. I want to say, you already have. I spit in your soup. And this is a found poem about it's about the conditions that enslaved people had to face and how perilous and how unhealthy and how dangerous it was. The kind of hardships that they had to face. I'm going to read it from up here. And so it's a found poem because the first part of each line comes directly from the ledger. The only thing that I added is rather than, in the ledger, the age and the column and the age and the description would have been in separate columns, and I just put at between the age and what came directly out of the ledger. Ages of the enslaved according to the Lloyd's ledgers. At what age is hope born? Child at 1 week old, infant at 1/2 year, stout, not good inclined at 11, promising at 12, lame in the hip at 12, small and weakly at 13, sold at 17, first rate, will breed at 17, common hand at 18, a good hand at 23. When does resistance first rise up? Indifferent at 25, stout but bad inclined at 27, an idiot at 28, a bad fellow at 33, infirm hand at 36, lame, infirm at 39, lame ankle at 41, has fits, rarely works at 44, lost a finger at 47, good of his age at 48. When do dreams wither? Nearly done at 50, worth but little at 57, blind at 50, unable to work at 62, past labor at 71. My Lord, how did my kin get over? And I especially like that illustration. There's Daniel Lloyd next. Oh, we know that. That's
Wow.
yeah.
That is gorgeous.
And that goes with a poem that's in the voice of a slave ship. And we're not going to read that one because it's like a really long one. You want to talk about that?
So this on the left is my depiction of one of my ancestors' chicken soup. So chickens were the only livestock that enslaved were allowed to trade for money, for capital. Don't know how that happened, but that was what they were allowed to do. And she would take care of her chickens and sell them, and they're like, her pets, her friends, but she also had the job of cleaning up after the cockfight. So the enslavers, they had too much money, and they liked to see blood and violence, and they would fight her chickens, and she would clean up after the events. So if you can imagine what it was like, if you've ever had a pet and your pet has passed away, it's a horrible feeling for a child. Horrible. I remember when my iguana died, I was about to have a
He still needs
horrible
therapy about that.
problem. Yeah, that was my little buddy Spike, But, pets are very important parts of children's lives. If you ever had a pet, you can attest to that. You love your pets typically love you, and you would hate to see your pet ripped to shreds. So that's what she experienced, throughout her life.
Over and over again.
And this is Elder Isaac, the depiction of Elder Isaac with the cane. The question of who was our ancestor, what did he do? And since we couldn't really see his face, we only knew that he walked around with the cane and that his job was to, instruct the Lord's Prayer, teach the Lord's Prayer, and then strike strike the ones that didn't remember it properly. That's how I depicted it. Isaac Copper. Why am I called minister? Why am I called doctor or minister? And this little African relic was found. It was a relic.
Well, one like it. We
Yeah.
didn't actually see the relic, but they said a two-headed carving was found, and in the archaeological dig, and the archaeologists speculated that it may have belonged to a healer on the plantation. So of course I've speculated that it belonged to Dr.
Yes.
Isaac.
So, when you are among the few who can remember the motherland or who heard first-hand accounts of it, you must keep watering those roots. When you are the only one who knows for sure that he descends from African royalty, you must take the lead in teaching others, even if prayer is the only education allowed to the enslaved. When you are the keeper of stories, cures, and rituals, you must tell your children their heritage. You must summon the power of the shamans and healers and the ancient wisdom of the elders. When you are past labor, you hold a two-faced carving in one hand and a cane with the other. You make magic bundles of stones and coins and poultices from plants in the hothouse. When you are the only one who knows, you tell somebody, you show somebody. You remember for those who might forget. You pass it down.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's Jeffrey's depiction of Isaac Copper on the ship from Easton Point to Baltimore after he enlisted in the U.S. colored troops, or he was recruited into the U.S. colored troops. So I'm going to read a question poem, and I probably won't read all of it. Questions for Dr. and Minister Isaac Copper. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm not going to read all of it. I may skip around a bit. How did you come to be owned by the Lloyds? Were you kidnapped near the coast of Africa or far from it? Did your father, the chief, send warriors to find you? Were you herded onto a slave ship while still in your mother's womb? The favorite Polly from Ghana's Cape Coast Castle. Were you on a later ship, the Patience perhaps, which landed in Oxford in 1766, the only slave trading port on Maryland's eastern shore? Were you the one who arrived in 1762 from Montserrat on the charming Anne? Who were your gods then, and what was your given name? Were you Ebo, Ashanti? Were your parents willed to Edward by his half-brother, Richard Bennett III, the wealthiest man in North America? How many times had you changed hands by 1770, when your name and age, 7, were listed in an inventory of the late Edward III's property and personal effects? What do you recall? The bosom of family, tribal rhythms, African earth underfoot, the first time you glimpsed a pale face, the stench aboard ship, the auctioneer's gavel, or only the lapping of the Wye River? Were you born here, Isaac? Is White House all you know? So that poem is really about my brick wall, which I hit at 1770. So yeah, before we conceived the project, we went to an art exhibition of paintings by Ruth Starr Rose and took a trip to West Africa that sparked our curiosity. So the painting on the left is by Ruth Starr Rose, who was a neighbor, would have been a neighbor of my great-grandfather in Copperville. She was from a white family who moved down from Wisconsin. They had money, made money in the lumber industry, and they bought an old plantation, which was really a ruin, and they restored it, and she lived there during her teen years and returned and had a studio there. She was a Vassar-trained painter, but instead of painting socialites, as a white woman might have expected to have done at that time, she painted people in her community. And those people I would find when I went to the Ruth Starr Rose exhibition, which started in Baltimore, the Lewis Museum, and toured the Delmarva Peninsula. Those people depicted in the paintings were my family members. But a mystery remains, and it is whether that painting is my father. My father never mentioned City Core painting, and my great aunt never mentioned Ruth Starr Rose, but there used to be a road straight from our house over to Hope House, which was where Ruth Starr Rose's parents lived. And so I know that my father had to have gone over there at some point. Why? Because my aunt worked there. My great aunt worked there, his aunt worked there. So I'll never know whether that's him, but Brian and Eric, several artists have said, I think it's got to be the same person. So I don't know. But I'd like to think it was my dad, and I would love to get my hand on that portrait. We also took a trip to West Africa, again, before we knew we were going to be working on this project. But everywhere we went in West Africa, I kept waiting to feel like this is where my people came from. You know, if this is where my people came from, I'm going to feel, you know, something coursing through my veins. The wind's going to blow a certain way. But I never did feel any of that. We did visit Gorée Island. That's Jeffrey on the way.
You gotta go to East
It's almost
Africa,
like I didn't go on
Ethiopia.
the trip. I took all these pictures of him, and then like maybe 2 or 3 pictures of me. It's almost like, what, did I go? And that's the statue commemorating and honoring those who were lost to Africa through the slave trade. That's the door of no return. And Jeffrey, you take it from here.
Okay, so we, of course, this is in Senegal, in Dakar. On the left, in the middle, that's the people's mayor, Al Mami. He was our tour guide, so if you ever go to Dakar, ask for Al Mami. Perfect tour guide. On the right, as we were touring the city, we were going around in different shops, and there was like a little marketplace, They had all different types of stores, jewelry stores, like drum stores, wood carving shops, and there was a group of young men, and they had like amazing technological camera equipment out there, and they were rapping. And I was considered myself to be a rapper at the time of sorts, and my tour guide, he's like, oh, Jeffrey's a rapper, and they're like, oh, rap for us. And
In French, they weren't speaking in French.
Yeah, so there was a language barrier. I do not speak French, not one word. Well, maybe bonjour, right? Yeah, okay, cool. So there was a massive language barrier, but I say that hip hop is the language of the global youth culture, and I rap for them. If you've ever been or seen a hip hop cipher, you know, when people drop bars, like at the end, someone's like, oh, and it was like ridiculously hyped for I have no idea if they knew what I was saying, but at the end of every bar, it was like, oh! And then I got done rapping. There was a crowd of people around us. Like, I have no idea where everybody came from, but it was like turned into a crowd of people, a small concert in the marketplace, and they're like, you gotta be in our music video. So they handed me the Senegalese flag, and I'm in the marketplace.
That's right.
Yeah, hip hop, it crosses cultural barriers.
Yes.
So these are some of the books that I have coming out this year. The first 3 are already out.
Wow.
Rose is kind of a departure for me. It's a 52-word book. It's the shortest text I've ever written. And I wrote Crown of Stories is really a love letter to Toni Morrison. It's a poetic biography, as is Outspoken Paul Robeson. It's a biography in verse, and like Paul Robeson, Bridges Instead of Walls, which is about Mavis Staples, is a biography told through a sequence of poems in each book. Crowning Glory, I mean, what were the chances that I'd have Crown of Stories and Crowning Glory come out in the same year? Is my second collaboration with Aqua Holmes, and it's a celebration of black hair.
Yes.
So that's what those, Crowning Glory will be out in the fall, and Bridges Instead of Walls will be out in the summer. And I got to meet Mavis Staples, and go on. And this is our next collaboration. It's our first co-authored project.
So this book is coming out on March 18th of 2025.
Wow.
This is my first authored title. I guess a little bit of backstory about this. I've been teaching hip hop workshops in the United States and abroad since 2016. And I noticed that there was a giant disconnect between African American boys specifically. Okay, they love rap, hip hop, and we know that literary devices make up hip hop. So they'll love hip hop, won't like to read or won't want to write, and need to be able to do these things.
Yes,
you need to be able to do these things.
Yes.
It's the first form of communication that we have.
Yes.
And I found for myself that hip hop was like therapeutic. Kids, just like my mom says, you know, are kids old enough to have these experiences and have these conversations? The answer is a resounding yes. You know, we live a life that we all go through something. We all go through something. Some of the things that we go through might be more heavy than others, but you can't get out of this life without having some type of unseen trauma that you think nobody else can see, and you might feel like you're alone in it. And I went through things just like everybody else, and I thought that I was alone. And through hip hop, specifically through hip hop, it changed my life completely. Got rid of the trauma that I had by speaking about it, instilled a level of confidence that I didn't even know was possible. And the reason that I can even be a public speaker up here, talk to you all comfortably, is because I've performed in front of thousands of people, right? I've been in the streets, like, where it's not a stage. Like, performing poetry in the streets is different than performing on a stage, right? So I'm that guy. And that's what I've done. Right. Like, I will sit in the subway, everybody's quiet. All of a sudden, bop, 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 and get up and do revolutionary poetry. Right?
You gonna do some poetry?
Allow me to introduce myself.
Yes.
My name is Jeffrey the Artist. I'm a master of fine arts, and I've been striving to start movements like a young Romare Bearden. I got a couple legendary cool cats in my circle with great whiskers, but me, honestly, I've been struggling to grow this beard in. And you see, I'm black like exploitation films, I'm bad like Mike Jack, I'm relevant like Afro-Cobra, so I've never had my mic jacked. You see, I got bit, and I started absorbing venom the moment I shook hands with Professor Phillips and Professor Anderson. Now I'm infused in my art with power as I move my hand and blend, and each stroke that I make will redefine the way that you see as I practice this blackness on canvas like the artist of the way you see. And you see, it was my ancestors guiding me, melanin dripping as I wrote this on loose leaf, and I would have given Sarah Bartman 2 seats, because I know she was so tired of standing and being examined. Now look how far we've come. We've got powerful, smart, creative women where we at right now, planning on creating art until the hidden truth scene. And over the course of my studies at Howard, my mind slowly spiraled into a new scheme, and I started replacing my bad habits as I woke up into a new dream. Now I'm a mix of Martin, I'm Malcolm, I'm a dash of Marcus Garvey, Biggie, Tupac, Basquiat with the whole brash artist army. And I stand before you with my tribe working like the Comanche workshop, demanding the hurt stop, dismantling your thoughts, or as the planet's core is hot and this planet's a short shot. Respect to Roy D. Carava and James Hinton. Guess that my brain's hinting if we don't carry on the torch, the future of black art's frame's gonna be missing. Because it's up to us to carry on the legacy of the black artist aesthetic. One of us has the recipe to success, and I suggest we look for who last read it. Some, they say that I have delusions of grandeur, and I just say, what's wrong with having changed the world written on every single page in your planet?
Woo! That's right, that's right.
So
Thank you.
That poem was my homage to the black artist movement. My professors at Howard University, they were part of Afro-Cobra. Professor Phillips, Professor Anderson, that's like the same artist collective that Romare Bearden was a part of.
Yes.
So I was studying under these great African full perspective artists, and they instilled in me that my art has to mean something. You know, I can't just create art just because it's a pretty picture. That's not me. Any other artist, that's, you know, that's what you study, that's what you do, that's what you do, right? You gotta do what your soul is attached to and tied to.
Yes.
And that poem, I was doing my master's thesis, like I was literally stressed beyond stress, writing my master's thesis out and practicing it. Then all of a sudden they say, Jeffrey, we want you to do a poem for the Afro-Cobra Gala. It was like,
That's because Sonia Sanchez couldn't make it.
because Sonia Sanchez couldn't make it, so they enlisted me.
Wow.
Right? So, yeah.
I used to get called when Maya Angelou, we lived in North Carolina, and Maya Angelou was in Winston-Salem. People would call me, oh, well, Maya Angelou can't come to our school, can you come?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I had to switch gears. I had about 4 or 5 days to do this poem and memorize it. It's like, literally the ancestors, like poetry and all. How do you do these things? It's ancestral energy, right? You don't have to get up in front of people and like, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
What's supposed to happen is gonna happen.
It is.
Right? What needs to land is going to land at all points.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm off my soapbox. Are we?
I don't know.
I don't know. I
guess
think
we
we're
are.
finished.
I think
Woo! Amazing, amazing.
on to
Okay.
it, so we can do the last panel. But during the meet and greet, if you wanna get your book signed and you wanna ask any questions,
I'll just
you can do it during that time.